Learning Objective 5 discusses the performance measures that we can use on investment centers. So we're going to look at return on investment and residual income as two different KPIs that we can use to evaluate investment centers. So first, let's talk about why these investment centers differ from the others that we've looked at: profit, cost, and revenue. When we're looking at an investment center, remember, they take things one step further, and they're looking at how well a company is utilizing that operating income to reinvest in their organization. So we want to know how efficiently and how well they're maximizing operating income and how efficiently they're using the organization's assets to generate those revenues. So we do this using a return on investment formula, and it's one of the most commonly used, but it does have some downfalls that we'll talk about as we move forward. Once again, think of return on investment as a measure of two different things: profitability and efficiency. So you can see, let me grab my pen here. You can see that we're going to be looking at two things. First, operating income, and then average total assets. How well are we using these assets to generate operating income? Okay, so we can break this down actually into, or expand it if you would rather prefer to explain it that way, into profit margin ratio and an asset turnover ratio. So this gives an organization a little better picture of what is truly driving that evaluation of operating income and average total assets. So the profit margin is simply how much income are we generating from our sales, and the asset turnover ratio is simply how well are we using our average assets to generate sales. Now, there's one other formula or method, KPI, that we can use to evaluate an investment center, and this is called residual income. Unfortunately, with return on investment, some managers may be discouraged from buying new equipment or investing in new fixed assets for their organization because they may not initially meet that required return on an investment for their organization. And so sometimes this return on investment KPI can cause managers to make short-term decisions that avoid investment simply because they would not initially meet their return on investment in the short term. So this is not good for an organization long term. So residual income is another formula that can be used that your book says provides a little bit more goal congruence than the return on investment alone. And what happens with the residual income is that we're looking at, once again, operating income and average total assets, but we're allowing the manager to set a target, a minimum target for that return. So it is still measuring profitability and efficiency, just as we have discussed before. We're looking at our actual operating income less a specified minimum acceptable operating income. Okay, so what are we actually generating back out of that, our specified minimum that we would have to generate if we move forward with these investments? And so we have what your book says, the acceptable operating income that we're going to use as our minimum is going to be generated by this target rate of return. So management actually will establish a target rate that we're looking for times the average total of assets to generate a minimal acceptable operating income, and then we use the residual income either usually along with our return on investment. And so this allows an organization, let's just start at the bottom here with residual income. Okay, so this allows the organization, your book says, to promote goal congruence better than return on investment, because managers can estimate the minimum target rate of return that they would like to achieve. And if we have different levels, different divisions, different segments that have different levels of risk within our company, then they can establish different target rates of return instead of just a basic how much return did we generate on the assets in our organization as a whole. Okay, so now we're not saying that return on investment is not a good tool. We're simply saying be aware of the downfalls and the consequences of simply making bad short-term decisions that would prevent us from generating significant profit in the long term. So let's back up and look at the return on investment formula again in summary. We're looking at the profit margin ratio times the asset turnover ratio. Okay, and we look at, your algebra. We have operating income as a percentage of net sales, and then we have how well are we generating sales with the assets that we have. So if you eliminate your like factors here of net sales, we simply have operating income divided by our average total assets. How well is an organization using their assets to generate operating income? And so we just need to think about how, what are the situations that would improve our return on investment? Well, we either have to improve our operating income or we have to minimize our total assets. And so when minimizing our total assets means we are avoiding the investments that could help us to generate more revenue, that may be a bad short-term decision that impacts us in the long term. On the other hand, if we are if we're trying to turn our inventory quicker, if we are removing assets that we are no longer using, fixed assets that we're no longer using that aren't efficient, from our formula, then that can help us improve our return on assets. But if we're using any of those fixed assets to generate income, they need to be a part of our formula. Okay, so once again, what are we trying to do in an investment center? Determine how well a company is reinvesting their profits into fixed assets in their organization to generate additional revenue. So just be aware that we need both of these formulas to help us truly make a wise decision about whether we should truly make an investment that we're considering in our organization. Now, as we mentioned, there are some limitations on the financial measures, but they are good key performance indicators and they are good tools that we can use. Just keep in mind what the drawbacks happen to be. We are measuring, if you'll notice, we are measuring our average total assets here at a point in time. So when we're doing this calculation, we're looking at the assets as of December 31st. But our revenues for the entire period, or we're looking at our total assets at the end of a quarter or the end of a month. And so those assets could change on a day-to-day, monthly, quarterly, certainly annual basis. Keep that in mind. And if we have assets that aren't being used in production, they may have been removed from our balance sheet. And even though we have acquired them and invested in them, they are not part of this calculation. Okay, but they're still there. What do we do with those? Also, it does sometimes encourage organizations to ignore the long-term benefits of an investment simply because they're trying to meet the key performance indicator of a certain return on investment for an organization. So you have to be able to look at the big picture when you're using these key performance indicators. All right, let's take a break and we'll come back and look at one more final topic in your text, transfer pricing.